It's time we discuss the Houston Rockets because they're a team that I really, really respect. I have tremendous love for any team that is trying to change the way basketball is being played. I have tremendous love for James Harden, who completely is a master of the NBA rulebook that literally bent the rules to his will so he could become one of the greatest scorers in NBA history. When you're the guy that comes up with arm hooks and double step backs and you have other people imitating your moves, that deserves respect. Whether he is able to win championships or not, he is one of the greatest offensive players that I've ever had the pleasure of watching. And that for that alone, I have tremendous love for the Houston Rockets. And this is coming from a Laker fan. But when it comes to the way they're constructing the team around James Harden, well, that's a different story. So what's going on, guys? Your boy Mike here, and before we get to the content, make sure you just drop a like on the video. It took some time to make, but on top of that, I'm going to be live streaming NBA 2K21 consistently on my Twitch account. I'm really trying to make a push onto gaming. My Twitch is twitch.tv/FlightMike, and for the most part, I just stream on Twitch just so I could talk to my biggest supporters or people that just want to talk to me or have a dialogue with me. So I'm going to leave a link to that in the description down below. And if you also want to talk to me in the middle of games, make sure you follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Now that we got all that out of the way, cue the intro. I initially said a year ago when the Rockets made the trade for Russell Westbrook that it was by far one of the worst trades they've ever made in their entire franchise history. And just to remind you of what the trade was, here's exactly how the trade went. The OKC Thunder sent Russell Westbrook to receive Chris Paul. And because of the age difference and the fact that Chris Paul's contract is known as one of the worst contracts in the league, the Houston Rockets also sent their 2024 first pick, which is pick protected from 1 to 4, their 2026 first round pick, which is pick protected from 1 to 4. They have a 2025 pick swap, which is 1 to 20 protected, and a 2021 pick swap, which is protected from 1 to 4. And here's the thing that is so scary about this. The first of these picks comes in 4 years when James Harden is going to be 35 years old. So they're going to be coming in years where the Houston Rockets are definitely going to be rebuilding. And every team has to rebuild eventually. So that's what we could expect. In 4 years from now, the OKC Thunder are going to be loaded with a boatload of draft picks, and I'm sure Sam Presti's going to be out for revenge after what happened when he drafted 3 future MVPs and wasn't able to get anything out of them in forms of championships. But that's not what we're here to discuss today. What we're here to discuss today is how the Houston Rockets essentially sealed their fate when they traded so much capital to essentially downgrade from Chris Paul to Russell Westbrook. And that's not to say that in terms of pure basketball, Chris Paul is way, way better than Russell Westbrook. No, not at all. It's just when you have a Mike D'Antoni system, a system that is literally emphasizing isolation ball because James Harden is a phenomenal isolation player and wide open three-point jumpers, well, you don't want to trade a player that averaged 36% from 3 in his final year with the Houston Rockets. Yes, Chris Paul, I'm talking about you. And by the way, he averaged 38% from 3 the year prior and is averaging 37% from 3 this year. You don't want to trade that and a bunch of picks in order to get a player that averaged underneath 30% from 3 in his final 2 years with the OKC Thunder and is averaging 26% from 3 this year. That just doesn't make sense. The way the Houston Rockets work is if you're not spacing out the floor in order to create isolation opportunities for James Harden, well, you're clogging up the paint, which makes it way harder for James Harden to operate. So as a result of that, the Rockets are obviously at their best when they're surrounding James Harden with capable three-point shooters. And the reason why Chris Paul and James Harden worked is when James Harden didn't want to isolate, or when the isolation happened to not work out, where, well, you had Chris Paul's mastery as a pick-and-roll point guard to bail the Rockets out. And for the most part, that's why they made it to the Western Conference Finals their first year together. And it worked remarkably because they also, on top of that, had tremendous 3-and-D players. They had Trevor Ariza, Gerald Green, PJ Tucker was still on the roster, and they also had Luc Mbah a Moute, which these are all very capable defenders. And what the result was a season that the Rockets finished first in the NBA in offensive rating and sixth in the NBA in defensive rating. And things went really, really well. As a matter of fact, I think they probably would have beaten the Golden State Warriors in the Western Conference Finals if it wasn't for Chris Paul's injury. And my heart goes out to Chris Paul because, oh my God, he gets injured at the absolute worst points. So then we go to the very next year, and it's kind of a similar story, but at the same time it's not, because the year after, they made some changes. You see, the following year, Luc Mbah a Moute and Trevor Ariza were no longer members of the Houston Rockets. And although it seems like, okay, who cares? They lost two role players. They pretty much lost their two best two-way defenders. And as a result, you could see it on paper. It's glaringly obvious. The Rockets once again finished very well in offensive rating, although not as well as before, when they finished second in the NBA in offensive rating with a 115.5, but this time their defensive rating plummeted all the way to a 110.7, which is way worse than it was the year before, a 106.1, and as a result, they finished 17th in the NBA in defensive rating. The result, they finished in the second round of the NBA playoffs, getting knocked out by, once again, the Golden State Warriors. And this time, there was a different narrative. You see, what the media likes to do is they like to manipulate us and tell us, hey, you see, the pairing of Chris Paul and James Harden clearly cannot win championships, clearly isn't good enough to make it. So, in order for the Houston Rockets to succeed, they need to bring a brand new star. And I guess maybe the media got to Daryl Morey's head, because the answer and the problem was literally right in front of him, yet he kept on ignoring it and opted to invest more in offense. He brought in Carmelo Anthony throughout the year, although it was briefly. That's literally a move that's saying, hey, we lost defense, but here's some more offense to go with it. He chased Jimmy Butler in the offseason, and well, this past offseason, we saw his ultimate move. He decided to swap Chris Paul for Russell Westbrook, and on paper, it kind of looked nice. You know, you have a 35-year-old point guard that you're swapping for a 31-year-old point guard, and you're giving up a couple of first-round picks because Russell Westbrook's contract kind of makes more sense than Chris Paul's. And you see, that was the big problem of it all. They just further, if you ask me, they got even worse at this point. Now they have a roster that has almost no defensive players, although they're doing really well in the playoffs. I guess something is clicking for them. A lot of analysts say it's because of Eric Gordon taking a step forward. I'm not really sure, but they're even further investing in becoming a more offensive team. And of course, trading for Robert Covington was definitely a step in the right direction, but I don't know if going all small is also the step in the right direction as well. As a matter of fact, I think they would have been way better off if they just traded for Robert Covington and they kept Clint Capella. As a matter of fact, that would have put them in a similar situation that they were in when they made it to the Western Conference Finals, and only they now have a point guard that isn't capable of making threes as much. Pickle that they're in now is they clearly have a worse running mate for James Harden, and I don't care what you say. I don't think there's a single one of you that's disagreeing with me, and if you want to disagree with me, please let me know in the comment section why. But now you have a player that not only is a defensive liability in Russell Westbrook, but he literally doesn't belong in this offense at all. As a matter of fact, Russell Westbrook has been so bad that he is currently averaging career lows in the playoffs for points per game, player efficiency rating, offensive box plus minus, and defensive box plus minus, and value over replacement player, which means the Rockets are pretty much better when Russell Westbrook isn't on the floor. But I'm not done there, because if we even go ahead and look at his win shares, his offensive win shares is a negative 0.6, his defensive win shares is a 0.3, and his win shares in total is a negative 0.2 in the NBA playoffs. Now, when you compare that to previous years, he obviously was significantly better in the playoffs, but I'm not trying to say Westbrook is an awful player. I'm trying to say that I am baffled at the fact that Daryl Morey, a man that consistently brands himself as a guy that goes based off of numbers and based off of analytics, I am surprised that he decided to trade Chris Paul, who, when we look at his statistics, contributed 0.5 offensive win shares, 0.6 defensive win shares, 1.1 win shares, and this is in the playoffs, by the way, a offensive box plus minus of 0.7, a defensive box plus minus of 1.7, and a total box plus minus of 2.5 in his final season in Houston, which, by the way, it's significantly better in OKC. Take a look at his stats from OKC. These are just beautiful, but obviously different position. He's in a different system. It obviously worked out for him. I am just perplexed at the idea that the Houston Rockets would move on from a player that clearly fit their scheme so much better. And I don't care about the rumors of James Harden and Chris Paul not getting along. It doesn't really matter. If you want to win a championship, you don't make moves based off of your emotions or the emotions of your star player. And if you're a star player, like, this could be a criticism of James Harden as well. You don't say, hey, I don't need Chris Paul. Let's bring in a player that clearly doesn't fit our system as much just because we were buddies back in the beginning of my career. You try to work things out and you try to make moves that make sense. The Robert Covington trade would have been remarkable last year. If they made this move last year, I think they could have made it to the NBA Finals. I am fairly confident, especially when you consider the fact that Kevin Durant had some injury issues and the Golden State Warriors were probably exhausted from making it to the finals so many times. I am 100% confident that they would have beaten the Warriors if they had the idea that they needed to improve upon their defense and stop paying so much attention to offense. You have the best offensive player in NBA history. You don't need to invest any more capital or resources in offense. You don't need to swap your star player anymore. As a matter of fact, I don't even think James Harden really needs a hardcore star player along his side. He just needs competent pieces around him that are capable defenders and maybe a playmaker that occasionally could do stuff with the ball in his hands when the attention isn't on him. I feel like James Harden would be fine if he had Ricky Rubio on his side. I'm dead serious. But none of that matters because the Houston Rockets are now in a very difficult situation where their star player doesn't have any additional help and there's no way out of this. Do you think any team is going to want to trade for Russell Westbrook after the performance he's given? Do you think his stock will even be that high up? Hell, do you even think the Houston Rockets will be competent enough to say, hey, Russell Westbrook clearly isn't a good fit for this team. We should ship him elsewhere. And even once they do ship him elsewhere, do you think that they're going to get much of a return from him? I don't know. The Houston Rockets are in a very tough situation, but there's good news as well. The Rockets also seem like they're one or two good trades away from being a contender. Literally just swapping out Westbrook for cap space and some good pieces to surround James Harden with. Good players that play defense. If you want, bring a center in. Maybe go after Andre Drummond or something like that. And maybe he doesn't want a max contract. If that's the case, then you get James Harden, his lob threat once again. And then you also go and pick out some players that you could trade for that could provide some two-way potential. Then I feel like this team could contend. But the reality of the situation is James Harden is now 31 years old, and this is appearing to be yet another empty trip in the NBA playoffs. Unless if Russell Westbrook magically learns how to shoot threes overnight, or if the Houston Rockets offense starts running around Westbrook a bit more, but yet it's very easy to guard Westbrook in these playoffs. You just have to back off on him and dare him to shoot threes. He's a freaking 26% shooter from three, 22% during the playoffs. It's not that hard to guard him. I don't know. I feel like the writing's on the wall for this team. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something I'm not seeing. Please let me know in the comment section down below if you disagree. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike. I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.